Before we dive in, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories that touch the heart and remind us of life's unexpected moments, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. It helps more than you know. Now, let me tell you what happened. I was standing at my kitchen counter that afternoon, sorting through the usual stack of mail, bills I didn't want to look at, flyers I didn't remember signing up for, and the one magazine subscription I kept mostly out of habit. The house was unusually quiet. My daughter had moved out 3 years earlier, and though I'd gotten used to the stillness, some days it felt heavier than others. The doorbell rang just as I poured myself a fresh cup of tea. A soft chime, almost hesitant, like whoever was on the other side wasn't sure if they should be there. When I opened the door, I found Ethan, my friend Linda's son, standing on my porch with his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. I hadn't seen him in nearly a year. He was older now, not in the sense of age, but in presence, the way some people gather a certain quiet strength over time. He offered a shy smile, one that reminded me of the boy who used to sit at my kitchen table years ago, while Linda and I talked about everything under the sun. "Hi," he said, a little breathless. "I was driving by and thought I'd stop. I hope that's okay." It caught me off guard. People rarely stopped by these days without texting first. But there was something sincere about his expression, something earnest I couldn't ignore. "Of course it's okay," I said, stepping aside. "Come in. You look like you could use a warm drink." He followed me into the kitchen, glancing around as though taking in old memories. The same walls, the same framed photos, the same slightly uneven chair that my daughter always insisted I replace. I handed him a cup of tea, and he wrapped his hands around it like he'd been chilled outside longer than he actually had. "So," I began gently, "what brings you here?" He set the cup down and let out a breath that seemed to carry weeks of unspoken weight. "I didn't know who else to talk to," he said quietly. "I didn't want to worry my mom." I leaned against the counter, giving him space to speak. I'd always believed that sometimes the best thing you can offer someone is room. Room to breathe, room to think, room to let their thoughts settle into words. Ethan wasn't a kid anymore, but there was a softness in him, the kind people carry when they're trying to figure out their place in the world. He told me about a difficult decision he'd been wrestling with, about feeling unsure of himself, about wondering whether he was making choices for the right reasons or simply because they were expected of him. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was honest, plain, raw honesty from someone who needed to let it out somewhere safe. As he spoke, the winter light filtered through the window, casting a warm glow across the table. He looked tired, not physically but deep down, the kind of tired that comes from holding too much inside for too long. And as I listened, I felt something shift in me. An awareness, maybe, of how rare it is for someone to come to you with their truth without dressing it up or hiding behind excuses. I nodded as he talked, asking gentle questions, letting him move through his thoughts at his own pace. The more he opened up, the more I realized how much he just needed someone to hear him without judgment, without rushing him, without turning his feelings into a lecture. There was a moment when he paused, looking down at his hands. "I didn't think you'd have time," he admitted, "but you always seemed to understand things in a way that made people feel less alone." His words landed softly but deeply. I hadn't thought of myself that way in a long time. Life has a way of making you forget the pieces of yourself that once mattered to people. We sat there for over an hour, the tea growing cold, the house feeling warmer. Not in temperature, but in presence. Sometimes company does that. As he got up to leave, he looked lighter than when he arrived. "Thank you," he said, voice steady now, "for listening, for being here." I walked him to the door, watching as he stepped onto the porch. The sky had turned a soft shade of gold, the sun dipping low behind the trees. He gave me one last grateful smile before heading to his car. When the door clicked shut, I leaned against it for a moment, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. His visit had stirred something in me, something unexpected yet strangely comforting. A reminder that even in the quiet seasons of life, connection can find its way back to you. And I couldn't help wondering what his visit truly meant, and why it felt like only the beginning of something neither of us had quite named yet. The next morning, I kept replaying Ethan's visit in my mind. I'm not sure why it lingered the way it did, but something about the honesty in his voice stayed with me long after he'd left. Maybe it was because people rarely come to me with their real worries these days, or maybe it was the way he seemed genuinely relieved just to talk. Whatever it was, it tugged at a part of me I thought had gone quiet years ago. I went about my day the way I usually did. A slow breakfast, a walk around the neighborhood, a few chores that I had been putting off. But every now and then, an image would slip back into my thoughts. Ethan sitting at my kitchen table, holding his tea, his shoulders heavy with uncertainty. I found myself wondering how long he'd been carrying everything alone. That evening, just as I settled on the couch with a blanket and an old movie I'd seen too many times, my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number at first, but something made me open the message anyway. "Hi, it's Ethan. Thank you again for yesterday. It meant more than I said." I stared at the message for a moment before typing back. "You're welcome. I'm glad you came over. Take care of yourself." I set the phone down, expecting that would be the end of it, but a few seconds later, another message popped up. "Would it be all right if I stopped by again sometime? I didn't want to overstay yesterday." There was a hesitance in his words I recognized, an uncertainty about whether he'd crossed a line or imposed himself. But he hadn't. Not even close. If anything, his visit had reminded me how much I missed having someone to talk to who wasn't rushing through the conversation or distracted by a screen. I replied, "You're welcome any time. Just let me know before you come." He sent a short thank you, and that was it. Simple, respectful, kind. Over the next few days, I kept returning to the thought of how much he'd changed since I'd last seen him. Not outwardly, though he certainly carried himself with more confidence, but in the way he expressed himself. He was more thoughtful now, more grounded. Life had shaped him into someone who paid attention, who listened, who considered things carefully before speaking. A few days later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, I heard his familiar knock again. Not too loud, not too soft, just enough to let me know he was there without startling me. When I opened the door, he stood with a small paper bag in his hand. "I brought muffins," he said with a sheepish smile. "From that bakery you used to take me and my mom to. I wasn't sure if you still liked them." The memory washed over me in an instant. Saturday mornings, Linda and I sitting at a little outdoor table, sharing pastries while Ethan, maybe 10 or 11 then, played with the tiny wooden stir stick from his hot chocolate. Those days felt warm, even in recollection. "I still like them," I said, stepping aside. "Come in." He walked into the kitchen, placing the bag gently on the counter. There was something different in the air this time. Not tension, not anything heavy, just an awareness, quiet and subtle, that our conversations had become something meaningful to both of us. We sat at the table, the same spot as before, and talked. Not about problems this time, but about little things. His new job, the projects he was working on, the things he'd learned about himself. He laughed more today, and I realized how much younger people soften when they feel comfortable. The heaviness he had carried before wasn't gone, but it didn't seem to weigh on him as tightly. At one point he paused, holding a half-eaten muffin in his hand. "I didn't want to bother you," he said quietly. "But the truth is, I feel like I can talk to you in a way I can't talk to most people. You listen differently." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard, the same way his honesty had the first time. I felt a warmth rise in my chest, not flattery, not anything dramatic, but a simple human appreciation for being seen. It's something that becomes rare after a certain age, when the world stops turning its attention your way as often. "You're not bothering me," I told him. "It's nice having company." He gave a slow nod, as if he'd been hoping to hear that but didn't expect it. We spent nearly 2 hours talking. The sun shifted across the kitchen floor, moving in gentle stripes of light. Dust floated in the air like soft, drifting snow. The house felt more alive than it had in a long time. When Ethan stood to leave, he hesitated near the door, looking at me with a thoughtful expression. "I hope this isn't strange," he said, "but these conversations, they help. A lot." Then, after a pause, "I don't want to cross any lines. I just appreciate you." His respect was clear in every word. There was nothing uncertain or inappropriate about it, just sincerity, the kind that becomes rare once people start guarding themselves from vulnerability. I placed a hand lightly on the edge of the doorframe, not touching him, just steadying myself with the moment. "I appreciate you too," I said. As he walked to his car, the late afternoon breeze rustled the leaves on the trees, sending a calm hush through the neighborhood. I watched until he drove off, then closed the door quietly behind me. Inside the stillness of the house, I felt something I hadn't felt in a while, a kind of quiet anticipation, the sense that my life was shifting slightly, opening in a direction I hadn't expected. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just new. And I wondered what would come next. The days that followed settled into a rhythm I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't planned, and it wasn't anything formal, just an occasional message from Ethan now and then, checking in, asking how my day was going, sharing something small he'd learned at work. Sometimes he sent a picture of a sunrise he caught on his early commute, or a silly photo of the muffins he tried baking on his own that ended up lopsided. It became a gentle, steady presence in my life, something warm without demanding anything from me. One late afternoon, as I was folding laundry by the living room window, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a message, but a call. Seeing his name on the screen made me pause for a moment. Ethan rarely called. He always said he didn't want to intrude. I answered, and his voice came through with a quiet tension I picked up on immediately. "Are you busy?" he asked, sounding careful. "Not at all," I said. "Is everything okay?" There was a beat of silence before he replied. "Could I come by, just for a little while?" Something in the way he asked told me he needed more than a simple chat. Not a crisis, not panic, just someone. "Of course," I said. "I'll put on some tea." We hung up, and I found myself turning on the warmer lights around the house, the ones that gave the rooms a gentle glow. I wasn't trying to make anything special. It was just something I did when I wanted the place to feel welcoming. Ethan arrived about 20 minutes later. He knocked lightly, the same familiar way. When I opened the door, he stood there looking a bit worn, not physically, but in the way people look when they've had a long day of pretending they're fine. "Come in," I said softly. He stepped inside, taking a slow breath as though the warmth of the house eased something in him. He followed me to the kitchen where the kettle was already humming. "I didn't mean to drop in like this," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I just had one of those days." "You're welcome here," I reminded him. "One of those days comes for all of us." He gave a small smile, then sat at the kitchen table. The chair creaked slightly as he leaned back, and he let out a sigh that sounded like it came from behind weeks of holding everything in place. I poured the tea and set his cup in front of him. The steam rose between us like a soft veil, carrying the scent of chamomile and honey. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like a pause we both needed. Finally, Ethan said, "I've been trying to figure out where I'm going in life. Everyone around me seems to have a path, a plan, something they're working toward, and I keep feeling like I'm behind somehow." It was a feeling I knew well. I'd felt it in my 20s, again in my 30s, and sometimes even now. That quiet fear of drifting when the world seemed to expect steady progress. "You're not behind," I said gently. "Life doesn't move in straight lines, no matter what people pretend. Sometimes the most important steps are the ones no one sees." He nodded, absorbing the words. "Someone once told me that when a person really listens, they stop moving. And Ethan was perfectly still. "What if I make the wrong choices?" he asked. I sat down across from him, wrapping my hands around my own cup. "We all make wrong choices. That's part of living. The important thing is that you're thinking, reflecting, trying to grow. That already puts you ahead of many people." He breathed out slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just a little. "I didn't think I'd find this kind of clarity here," he said. "I don't mean that in a strange way. Just, you make things feel less confusing." His words warmed me in a way I hadn't expected. Not flattered, just seen. Seen in a part of myself that had been quiet for years. We talked for a long time, longer than either of us realized. The daylight faded into early evening, and the soft glow of the kitchen lights made everything feel close, as though the room itself held our conversation gently in its hands. At one point he asked, "Do you ever feel like you're starting over?" I smiled faintly. "More often than you'd think. But starting over isn't a failure. It's a chance to approach life with new understanding." He leaned his arms on the table, his expression thoughtful and calm now. "I guess I'm learning that." Time passed without us noticing. The tea cooled, the shadows shifted, and still we stayed there, talking about small things, big things, and everything in between. What surprised me most was how natural it felt. Not forced, not strained, just two people finding comfort in sharing what was real. When Ethan finally stood to leave, it was already dark outside. He glanced toward the window, then back at me. "Thank you," he said again, but this time there was something steadier in his voice. "Not just for listening, but for making me feel like I'm not lost." "You're not," I said, meeting his gaze. "And you're always welcome here." He nodded, then walked to the door. The porch light illuminated him as he stepped outside, casting a gentle halo around the quiet street. He paused for a moment, as if he wanted to say something more, but instead he just offered a warm smile before heading to his car. When the house grew quiet again, I sat back at the table and felt a stillness settle over me. Not the lonely kind, but the kind that comes when something meaningful has entered your life unexpectedly. Something honest, something steady. And as I turned off the kitchen lights, I realized that whatever was unfolding between us wasn't just helping him. It was helping me too. The next few weeks became something I hadn't anticipated. Ethan's visits, his messages, the quiet conversations we shared, they became a steady presence in my life, a reminder that connection doesn't always come when we expect it, but sometimes exactly when we need it. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't about change overnight, but it was subtle and deeply comforting in a way that left an imprint on both of us. One crisp autumn afternoon, I was arranging some flowers on the kitchen table when the familiar knock sounded at the door. I smiled before opening it, seeing Ethan standing there with a small, slightly uneven pumpkin from the farmer's market in his hands. "I thought this might brighten the kitchen," he said, his eyes catching the light in a way that reminded me of those long-ago mornings when he was a boy, still discovering the world. "You thought right," I said, stepping aside. "Come in." He followed me inside, placing the pumpkin gently on the counter, and we both paused to take in its bright orange warmth against the neutral tones of the kitchen. It was such a simple gesture, but it carried more meaning than words could express. Life's beauty often shows up in small, unexpected moments. We sat at the table, talking about everything and nothing. The day had been ordinary, and yet extraordinary in its quiet way. He spoke about a project he was working on at his job, how challenging it was, how sometimes he questioned his abilities but kept going anyway. I listened, asking thoughtful questions, letting him reflect and explore his own thoughts aloud. I realized that in these moments, we weren't just talking about his life. We were both learning from it, seeing each other in ways the world outside rarely allowed. After a while, there was a pause. The sunlight had softened, casting long shadows across the table. He looked at me with a steady gaze, and I felt a wave of understanding pass between us. It wasn't anything that required explanation. We both knew that these interactions, these honest, open, patient conversations, had changed something fundamental in us. "You know," he said quietly, "I didn't think I'd find someone like you in my life after. Well, life happens. But talking to you, I feel like I've found a place to just be myself." I nodded, feeling the truth of his words resonate deeply within me. "That's what life's about in many ways," I said, "finding people who see us for who we are and letting them in, even if it's only in small ways at first." He smiled softly, and for a moment there was a comfortable silence. We didn't need to fill it with words. The calm of the kitchen, the warm light, the faint scent of flowers, and the soft ticking of the clock created a space where nothing had to be forced, nothing had to be hurried. It was just being. Two people connecting in a way that felt both rare and necessary. When it was time for him to leave, I walked him to the door. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, the golden light of late afternoon painting everything in soft hues. He turned to me, a gentle gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you," he said, "for everything. Not just for listening, but for being here." "You're always welcome," I replied. "That won't ever change." He smiled again, then got into his car and drove off slowly, leaving me with a sense of quiet contentment that I hadn't felt in a long time. I closed the door and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. The house felt warm, not just because of the heating, not just because of the sun, but because it was alive with the echoes of honest conversation, mutual respect, and understanding. I wandered back to the kitchen table, glancing at the pumpkin he had left behind. Something about it felt symbolic, not just the season, not just the gesture, but the reminder that life's moments, even small ones, can be transformative if we let them in. Sitting there, I reflected on the journey that had started with a simple knock on the door, a hesitant hello, and an honest heart. I realized that what had truly changed wasn't just Ethan or me, or even the dynamics of our friendship. It was the reminder that meaningful connections can arrive when we least expect them, and that they can teach us patience, trust, and the quiet joy of being seen and understood. The light shifted again, and I'd watched it spill across the table, catching the curves of the pumpkin and the gentle lines of my hands. I thought about how easily life can feel lonely, but also how one genuine conversation can cut through that loneliness in the most profound way. Ethan's visits had given me something precious, a renewed sense of presence, a reminder of the beauty of human connection, and the unexpected ways people can enter our lives and leave us feeling lighter, braver, and more aware of ourselves. As evening settled over the house, I found a quiet smile tugging at my lips. I didn't know what the future held, Ethan's life, my life, but I knew that these moments of honesty and mutual respect would remain, quietly shaping both of us. And that, I realized, was a gift beyond measure. Sometimes it takes a single knock, a few shared words, and a willingness to listen to discover just how much life still has to offer. And in that discovery, we find not only others, but also ourselves.